Welcome to another episode of the Tomorrow Today Podcast, Mapping the Future of Business, a podcast where we explore some key questions, latest trends, and insights shaping the future of business. And in today's episode, we will be delving into an exciting topic of the future of organizational design. My name is Buhle and Graeme, bionic business expert at Tomorrow Today Global.
And I'm Graeme Codrington, a future of work researcher and consultant. If the world is changing, then the ways we lead and the structure of our organizations need to change as well. And I think that most leaders understand this at an intuitive level, but they just don't have the time to step back and deal with the implications of needing to do a significant overhaul of organizational systems. And I think, to be honest, their own leadership styles probably need an overhaul as well. Or maybe it's even scarier than that. If your organization is already optimized, then what can you do as a leader? What if you are already getting the most out of your systems, your structures, your policies, and there actually isn't much that you can do with your current approach to move whatever dials you're moving? Well, that's what this episode is about. We believe that we've got to do a lot more than merely optimize existing organizational systems and structures. We need to reevaluate how our organizations are set up, maybe even reimagine them and design future-fit organizations that can deal with whatever comes our way in the rest of this decade and into the 2030s.
Graeme, it seems like leadership for the future is not for the faint of heart. and we do know that organizational design is crucial for the success of any organization because it involves shaping the structure, processes, and even the culture of an organization to support its strategic objectives. Now, with the rapid pace of technological advancements, the changing workforce dynamics, the traditional ways of doing organizational design need to be challenged. And for the most part, what we currently have in terms of organizational design is rooted and based on the world that no longer exists. We've inherited and we've been working in organizations that make more sense 8 years ago than they do now. And because this is what we know, we kind of feel like we're stuck with it.
Yeah, exactly, Buhle. And that, for me, I'm really passionate about trying to help people to understand this. I think we are at a unique moment in history. Well, it's not unique. Every few hundred years, I think, history goes through a massive systems change. And by systems, we're thinking about authority structures and the tools that we've got available, how we set up our economies and our politics. It affects our religions and our cultures. And it's what you study when you study history at school. And I think we're in one of those. I don't know how far into it we are, but maybe here's a quick example, Buhle. Imagine, I'm not saying democracy is the best form of government ever. I think it was Winston Churchill who said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. So it's kind of where some of us have, in some countries have got to, and there's different options available. But let's say you live and work in a country where you think democracy is a fairly good system. Well, here's my question. Buhle, do any of your clients use democracy in their organizations, in their corporations? Do you have any clients where people vote for their managers, they vote for their salary levels and their bonuses? Do you? I don't.
I would have to say that most organizations or some organizations will talk about democracy as if it's something that they do. But the truth of the matter is, I can't tell you of one company where that truly a true democracy is in place, right?
No, exactly. I know some companies have been experimenting with that. So I read a book about 25 years ago by Ricardo Semler called Maverick, and it's a Brazilian company called Semco, and they were experimenting with things. I know that Gary Hamel writes a lot about this, and he's got a wonderful book called Humanocracy. But I think all of these are sort of very much outliers. It's just an
Yes.
example. In fact, I think we'll come back to these themes in our next episode. But it's an example of what you were saying,
Mm.
that we have inherited a system which was optimized for the sort of end late stage of the industrial era. It was designed on supervision, top down control, breaking up organizations into their component parts. We call those silos now, or functions or departments. And I
Hmm.
don't know of too many organizations that are designed around new ways of organizational design, using new technologies to come up with new styles of leadership and management. And that's sort of not a criticism, because it's not easy to do that. But I think the time is now, the time is coming in the next 5 to 10 years, when this is going to be the way that organizations deal with uncertainty and volatility and build anti-fragile organizations that can go into the next decade.
Graham, I think 5 to 10 years is too long. This is something we need to do now. We are in that era of growing complexity and unpredictability. And so when you think about that old adage that, adapt or perish, it resonates now more than ever. And so as markets continue to fluctuate, I mean, technology advances, consumer behaviors change, the ability for companies to not only perform, but to transform becomes paramount for their survival and success. And so that's why we are talking about this today, because at its essence, when we're talking about organizational design, it should really help leaders to clearly explain three things. Number one, who we are as an organization. Number two, how we operate. And then finally, how we grow in a changed world that we find ourselves in.
And I think those three things, who we are, how we operate, how we grow, that really is the strategy. And it's the responsibility of leadership to be able to come up with more than just a vision, a mission, a goal, the type of stuff we've had before, but to think about strategy differently, to engage with strategy differently, and to allow that strategy to properly impact the organizational systems and the culture of the organization in which they work.
Excellent. So, welcome everyone to the future of organizational design. Now, to help us with this, I had a fascinating interview with our colleague Dean van Leeuwen as we delved into why organizational design is important and how he helps clients to be future ready.
Welcome, Dean. Thanks for joining us. We're so excited that you get to join us here on the Tomorrow Today podcast. Well, Dean, you help organizations to not only adapt to the future, but to be master architects in creating it. That sounds really, really cool, but it also sounds Doctor Strange like. But what does that really mean, Dean?
Hey, Buhle, it's great to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. Well, master architects. I think we've kind of stumbled on that on our journey. We've we started off as Tomorrow Today saying we're futurists. We look at the future. We understand these trends that are happening. But we strongly believe that you can't predict the future, right? But you can create it, all right. And I think that's a really key distinction here. You can create the future. So the best way to predict the future is actually to create it. Many of your listeners may be thinking, well, that sounds great, Dean, but the future's scary, and I'm just a little company. How do we create the future? So I want to share a quote. One of my favorite quotes is from Margaret Mead, and she says that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has.
That's a
And I think
powerful one.
I love it. I think it's so powerful. Small people on a quest who are passionate about doing things. That's what changes the world. And businesses and organizations are incredibly powerful vehicles for changing the world. So we believe that you've got to understand the trends that you see around you, but don't try and predict it. That's an academic. It's a bit of fun, I guess. But the true leaders, the great companies, they go out there and they create the future. And that's why we
Absolutely.
call ourselves master architects. We work with our clients to be architects of the future.
Absolutely, that's great, Dean. I think most of our listeners probably won't fall in the small people category, as you know. Most of the leaders that we deal with, it's a good concept to think that no matter how small or how big you are, that you can make an impact and that you can make a difference and you can actually create the future. And yeah, we speak to leaders and leaders of small organizations and some leaders of really large organizations and that are tuning into this. And we invited our listeners to download and delve into our Grey Elephants white paper. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, grey elephants, it's those significant yet often overlooked forces of change that have far-reaching implications for the world and organizations that we lead. So, Dean, how can a leader test that their organization is actually ready for these grey elephants we talk about?
No, that's a great question, Buhle. So grey elephants, they're highly probable, high impact, but largely ignored forces of change. These are forces, big forces that we see around us every day. They're not new things, but perhaps because they're so big or they're really scary, we tend to say, well, they're somebody else's job. Hopefully they go away. We'll try and, it's like the elephant in the room. We ignore it. And, and then suddenly they stampede and you go, oh my God, I wish I'd been prepared. And that's the key thing here is when you get hit by a grey elephant mega trend, when this trend appears, because often there's weak signals. We look for the weak signals suggesting that these grey elephants are going to kind of suddenly appear, and if you sense them, you can prepare for them. But if you're not sensing the world around you, you can get caught really off guard. So COVID-19 is a great example, pandemic, so a great example of a grey elephant. And, we knew that pandemics were highly probable. We learned about the high impact of it, but largely people were ignoring it. 3M, the science and technology company 3M, they didn't ignore this. Back in the early 2000s, they identified that pandemics could have a huge impact on their business and the industry and the markets. So they hard-coded their response to a pandemic threat, let's call it, or pandemic grey elephant, into their strategy. 2 decades later, they activated that strategy. They responded quicker than the competitors. They bounced back faster, more powerfully. They experienced a huge amount of growth, profit, share prices were increased just because they were prepared for that grey elephant.
Yes, Dean. So I guess the point you're making there is that be aware of these grey elephants, but be like 3M. Don't only just think about what's going to happen, but have a plan and a strategy of what you're going to do when the grey elephants suddenly appears. So a big part of organizational design, which is what we're talking about in this episode, is the importance of strategy. And unfortunately, most strategies often fail or even fall short of delivering on that expected value. So how do you help organizations avoid that strategic trap or pitfall with the 3D strategy framework. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think 70 up to 75% of strategies fail to deliver the results that were expected, and companies typically spend a lot of time working on their strategy, and so it's worthwhile getting it right and getting that real commitment. So to help our leaders and our clients with really developing the strategy to kind of capitalize on these gray elephants, we've developed what we call a 3D-dimensional strategy framework. And the 3-dimensional strategy, the first dimension is really your foundational, your strategic foundation, and that's all about your purpose, your values, your culture of your organization, and these have to be aligned to your true north. The next dimension is your strategic essentials, and these are the things that you have to do well in order to be an efficient and effective organization and to compete well. And then the third dimension is all about your strategic differentiators. What's going to differentiate you from your competitors? What's going to make you different? How are you going to elevate your performance? So that's the 3D model. We look at one of your foundational elements. We look at what are the strategic essentials, things you have to do, and then your differentiators, how you think about your strategy. I guess it compartmentalizes the process and the things that you need to be doing. And what we see is a lot of companies focus just on the sort of the second dimension. They'll say, what do we have to do to compete well and be effective and efficient and be cost effective and so on. And they solely sort of blinkered on that aspect. The 3D model helps them to think about the other really powerful, this holistic sort of viewpoint of strategy, that they're aligning the foundational points, but also thinking importantly about what's going to make real elevated performance, those differentiators. So it helps them to think about all three angles.
I love that. It sounds like a really comprehensive approach, and I love how each of those dimensions sort of like feed into each other as well, and sort of like build on each other. And you mentioned the importance of having that foundation and then building on it, and so sort of like that scaffolding that support then that strategic success and adaptability, right? So as we think about this, then Dean, it's interesting about these three dimensions, but do most companies manage to integrate all three effectively? Or is it something that sometimes, as you've already mentioned, sometimes they just want to focus on the essentials, but then miss out on the other two? What have you seen?
Well, what we see and what our research shows and what we work with our clients to avoid is, just focusing too much on one area. You can be a good company if you focus on the essentials, and these are important. These are the kind of entry level, your ballpark. You're playing a game in your industry, but all the competitors are doing the same thing. They know what the essentials are. It's what your customers demand. It's what your supply chains demand. It's your investors. It's but everyone knows that game, and they're all playing it. So then you think, well, why aren't we getting the strategic results? Well, you're just focusing on the essentials. You're focusing on what everyone else is doing, and it's just more Me Too type a strategic approach. It's copying. So the important thing is then to integrate that with your foundation, your purpose, that North Star, and your culture. Your culture, it's so important. That there's a quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that is very true. You need a good strategy. There's no doubting that. But if your culture is not aligned, it doesn't matter how good your strategy. And many companies don't align their strategy to their culture. And the values of the organization. So the foundational part of it is, we say you have to have that in harmony with the strategic essentials. And then the differentiators. This is where you really think hard about what do you need to do to truly be successful. And this is where I guess the grey elephants can come into the equation as well. You can think about how the world is changing and what is needed to really drive superior value in your industry. And you can then think about what your differentiators could be. We've identified a number of strategic imperatives, which we know are absolutely crucial for being competitive and exceeding levels of competitiveness in this changing world. And we work with our clients to really build those imperatives into their differentiated strategy.
And in some ways, I guess the biggest challenge for most organizations is that leaders find themselves in the throes of doing what they have to do every single day to survive, to keep employees happy, to keep stakeholders happy, and all of that. That sometimes this work of doing organizational design, of actually sitting down and drawing, sort of like going back to the drawing board and saying, who are we? What are we? What are our differentiators? It may seem sometimes or sound like it's kind of an indulgent exercise, like where, that's a nice to do. You get away and you go to a fancy resort and you sit and pontificate about all of these different things. And I think that's often the mistake that most organizations or most leaders do, is that to think of organizational design as an optional extra. As opposed to something that's really at the core of success going into the future. And now everybody talks about being agile and being adaptive. These buzzwords are sort of like thrown around, and I know that we've actually banned some of those, like pivot and many others. But I think it's still important to not ignore what they stand for, and to realize there's an underlying message there that's quite important. How do we deal then, with this disruption fatigue that some leaders are really struggling with today?
There's a real sort of desire or tendency to go, to stick with the knitting, to go back to what we know, to do the tried and tested, especially during difficult times. Let's just do what we know best. The problem is, we are living. People can look around. You can see that we are living during transformative times, and the problem with doing what worked in the past is basically what got us here won't necessarily get you there. So we have to reimagine. We have to rethink what it is that we are doing. In a world of breakthrough technologies like AI and machine learning, and we just have to rethink what it is that we need to do. And we like to talk about building bionic organizations. And bionic organizations is not taking AI and robots and adaptive learning, all that, and getting rid of automating things. It's not about replacing the workforce. Rather, building a bionic organization is about giving your workforce superhuman capability. It's about using that technology to augment and empower your workforce with incredible capabilities. So but that kind of thing just doesn't happen because we don't know. We haven't been here before, and that's a key thing with the transformative living during transformative ages. We can't tell you what the future is going to look like. We can't give you a roadmap for the future. You have to be an explorer leader. You have to prepare your team. You have to motivate them, and that's why the foundational elements and your purpose and your culture and value are so key. Because you don't have all the answers and you don't know where you're going, or you don't know what the future is going to look like. So we have to be explorers. We have to use that purpose as a North Star, and we have to experiment. We talk about creating anti-fragile organizations. That's what we work on with our clients, and building this anti-fragile muscle. Now anti-fragility is isn't just about recovering from these disruptions and these shocks into the system. It's about using disruptions as fuel for growth and improvement. Now, the concept of antifragile systems comes from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he suggests, in the face of uncertainty, there's not just an opportunity to bounce back, but he talks about bouncing forward to grow back faster and stronger. So, we need to get people excited about disruption, not just seeing it as a threat, but also an opportunity. And that's where the idea of, creating the future becomes so important. Because if you look at these big grey elephants, I've seen people just get, we're dealing with so many big things and we've got so much work on our hands, and actually talking about this disruption fatigue. People feel overwhelmed. But when you start to talk about antifragility and you start to talk about using the grey elephants as an opportunity for growth and to elevate performance, suddenly people look at them as a great opportunity, and that mindset set sort of shifts. Employees are less likely to feel overwhelmed by this change, especially when they see themselves as I guess, active agents in leveraging these forces of change for a better outcome. Again, tapping into that purpose. But as leaders, we've got to do things differently. We've got to prepare our organizations for this. So we've got to build redundancy and flexibility into our systems, so that we can ensure that our organizations do adapt to unforeseen circumstances. We have to have flexible work arrangements. We have to have diverse and equitable teams. So you've got to create these environments where these things can thrive, because otherwise you're going to end up with this disruption fatigue, and that's when you find that strategies don't deliver, and people just go back to business as usual. They go back to their day job, and strategy becomes something that you put in file 13 and you forget about it.
Absolutely, Dean. But what I am taking away again is that we have to build the right system, the scaffolding for that. But it's also about the culture that we build that supports what we are talking about. So it's having those three dimensions. And then it's about creating an anti-fragile organization that's able to not only be spooked by disruption, but be prepared and have a culture that's ready to deal with it, and so on. And so the grey elephants that we've mentioned, they really do help us with that. But I want for our listeners and viewers just to hear a little bit about how do we go about doing that when we work with our organizations. There's this process that we go through, and sort of like if you were able to summarize and give a picture of what you would do with an organization. And I know it's such an extensive work that sometimes it's hard to just put it in a short little stint.
Let me do that, because actually the process we work through with leaders and organizations, and we work with C-suites and CEOs is actually quite straightforward. What we find is that many of our clients have great strategies. So we would say to our leaders, stress test your strategy. Make sure that you understand these grey elephants, and that you have a response for them. That you're starting to build this anti-fragile muscle into how you're doing things. So the easy way to do it is to stress test your current strategy. Have a look at these grey elephants. Think about their impact on your business. How would you respond? Are you ready for them? Are you prepared? What might you still need to do? So you spend a lot of time in an exploration phase. So looking at your strategy, looking at these 7 great grey elephants, and delving deep into what we run these sessions where we have incredible sort of sprints and scrum sessions where teams really think about how their strategy and how the organization would react in with these different scenarios.
Okay.
And then we move
Okay,
into the
Dean,
evaluation phase.
before you move on, you just threw
Yes.
some words there, sprints and scrums, and yeah, some people are not rugby countries and they don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean by
We,
those?
well, we've done a lot of this work in Scandinavia, in America. It's the language is kind of interchangeable. So if you think of an analogy of a sports game, whether it's hockey in a Scandinavian country, or Canada, where you're in Canada and they love their ice hockey, don't they? Or South Africa, where rugby is big, or UK, where football is big. And what we do is we will have a session where we'll tell them information. We'll do a real dump about the different grey elephants and what they mean, the trends that we're seeing. And then we do a breakaway sprint. So you can imagine the team grabs a ball and they sprint off, and they're trying to score a goal. And they're analysing these grey elephants, and they're thinking about the opportunities, and they're thinking about the threats. And then we have this sort of scrum down, this sort of, what we call, in the hockey, you call it a face-off, don't you? Where they face off against with the puck in the middle, and so on. So the language, I guess, is interchangeable, but the idea is the same. We get the teams, for C-suite and senior lead teams, to kind of go up against one another in a competition, and I guess part of and they've got to debate. They've got to have these counter debates about, is our company or organization, are we ready for these grey elephants? And the other team argues that we're not ready. And it's a wonderful kind of interaction between these leaders, because most people are really proud of their company, and they're proud of their strategy, and we're getting them to really challenge and say, no, we're not ready. And the competition is fierce. It's lovely to watch how fierce the competition between these teams can be. And then we change roles, and we tell them more about other grey elephants. And then we switch roles, and now it's the other team's opportunity to say, yes, their company is ready, and the other team has to debate and argue that, no, they're not ready. So you get this real richness, and it's challenging of how their current strategy fits in with these grey elephants. And we start to see really great opportunities emerging, because that then leads us to the second phase, is all about the evaluation. We now need to think about our current strategy, the context of the grey elephants, and what it might mean for our future. So we evaluate all of that a lot. And then it's really important, because you remember early on you were talking about the delivery of strategy, and how most strategies fail to actually deliver the results. The third phase is about embarking. It's about elevating that strategy and the organization's performance. So there's a real emphasis on what we need to do to make sure that the culture is aligned. We're taking our leadership, our people with us, and then actually delivering on that strategy. So in a nutshell, three things we look at. We explore what the grey elephants mean for ourselves and our strategy. We evaluate the impact on our strategy, and then we embark with the real key aim of elevating that organizational performance.
I'm hoping that the leaders listening in are starting to think about what they are doing in terms of future-proofing their organizations with great organizational design. So thank you so much for sharing with us about what leaders can do to design the future of organizations. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future, Dean.
What a great interview, Buhle. Thanks for doing that with Dean. I could tell that you could probably have gone on and on if we hadn't given you a time limit. Well, at least I know Dean could have. But what's really clear, I think, from what you guys were talking about and what Dean said, is there's three dimensions of strategy, and they all have to work together. I really found that useful. We often think about that one level, which is getting that vision, I suppose that might be the word, that vision correct. But those other levels are absolutely important.
It really speaks to what we were talking about before, about those three questions that the leaders need to answer: the who we are, and what we do, and basically how we set ourselves apart from everybody else, and how we grow. And but I think, Graeme, when you think about this, another important element to all of this is the element of culture, because we can come up with strategy, and strategy can really be great on paper and in terms of how we put it together. And I think Dean really highlights it very clearly, the importance of involving the senior management team, coming up and pushing each other to come up with the best possible strategy. But without the right culture to support that strategy, everything often falls apart. And so I really believe, I mean, we've heard the phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think in this instance, as we think about organizational design, we cannot leave the question of culture behind, because culture is that secret sauce. It's that unique set of behaviors, rituals, and symbols that set us apart from everybody else. And so, what is it for our organization? We often have to look at that and take note of that. Yeah.
For me, that's maybe a missing element of strategy. When you work with organizations, their strategy is about what do we want the business to do? What are the things we want to achieve? How are we going to measure our success? What new products and services do we need to develop? Then maybe you get a little bit about what technologies do we need? What resources do we need? What people do we need? But I've not often seen a company that then describes the culture that's going to be important. They either take the existing culture as a given and say, well, we just do that, or they then begin to talk about maybe behaviors and attitudes and systems, and those will lead to culture. But I think you're right, Buhle. I think we need to have a conversation and understanding of culture and what it means. I know this is something you're passionate about.
And a big part of that is not to think of culture as something that sits outside or something that needs to be worked on separately. It's actually, as we look at those three dimensions that Dean was talking about, it's about saying, okay, how does our culture help us with this first dimension and this second dimension and that third dimension? And it really is about integrating it through everything, from hiring all the way to promotions, all the way to decision making, and so on. And often the telltale sign of a strong culture of performance includes leaders who consistently carry out the behaviors that the company aspires to, work practices that stand out and feel fresh to outsiders, because that's really what your culture is. It's something where outsiders, when they come in, they say, wow, that's really amazing. I've never seen it done this way. And so those are the innovative approaches to important moments that impact everything. And so when we think about this, I think it really needs to translate beyond just what we say our culture is, to actually affecting every practice that we look at. For example, Graeme, I think one example is how, like, Amazon, and I know that I'm not going to sort of like be referring to everything that Amazon does, but I think one really good example of how culture affects this is their famous two pizza rule. Now, when I hear pizza, I get excited, but I'm sure Amazon employees get excited too. But they're not talking about pizza for everyone, but they're saying that a good team should not exceed the amount or be larger than the amount of people that two pizzas can feed. I mean, that really makes sense in a lot of ways. And so when you think about it, this rule supports the company's approach to meetings. So keeping them small, no PowerPoint, start with silence, giving participants time to reread the required materials, and so on and so forth. And so that's an element of what culture can help to actually bring your strategy and make it successful.
I suppose, Buhle, the danger of giving examples of culture is that people then think, oh, I'm just going to copy that. And then, or in another one, they say, well, if it's two pizzas, how big is the pizza? And then does that mean it's a pizza for 4 people or 8 people or 27 people? And so, we need to be careful of examples, but examples are good. because examples give us an opportunity to maybe check our strategic imagination, not copying what somebody else does. I think unless you're going to copy every single thing that they do, and then you might as well be them, you're not copying exactly. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to look, what are the elements that they are playing with? And
Yes.
I like that example from Amazon, because the point is not the size of the meeting or the other things. What were some of the other things that they did? You said
Yeah.
there's keep it small. What were the other ones?
So keeping it small, it was the whole thing about starting meetings with the silence, for example, to give people that chance to
I
reread and
like
to
that one.
make sure that everybody's caught up. Those are some of the things.
Yeah. But now the point is not those things. So it's not
Yes.
just copy those things. The point is, and they have a cultural policy of the company needs to make decisions faster and
Yes.
better. So they want both of those together, not just speed, and it doesn't matter how good they are, but they're not just great decisions, no matter how long they take. And so what they then did is try to reverse engineer what would help us. What are some of the cultural practices that would get us there? And that's often, I think, the missing piece of the puzzle. And so if we go back
Yes.
to what Dean was saying about the 3 levels of strategy, that's kind of that last level, which is the differentiator, where you're saying to yourself, well, what can we do differently in our business that will build a different business that will actually deliver on our strategy? So I really like how you pulling culture and strategy together here.
And so, Graham, really, what you're touching on there is this whole point that it's not so much about what we actually do; it's what's the purpose for doing what we do. Do we know that purpose ourselves, and do we replicate it? Is it just a once-off thing? It's not a culture until it is something that is adopted by everyone. It's not a culture until it's something that's enforced not only by managers but by team members. And I think one great example, again, is about what do team members do when they see someone not living out their culture.
And so, Buhle, would you say that culture comes from the top? Is it leadership enforced down, or does it come from the bottom? Is it both? And where does culture come from?
Culture, really, we do have to be intentional about how we build culture. And so I would have to say that a really strong culture cannot exist outside of a direction from leadership in consultation and in partnership with those who are being led. But any successful culture that sticks really has to be one that is adopted from the highest levels of the organization, that is exemplified by the highest levels of the organization, and then that become operational in the way that we do things. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you say. People look at what behaviors are going to get me ahead in this organization. And that's often defined by how leaders treat people and how and basically what practices they value and look up to and promote. So it is definitely leadership driven. But the bit that's also important is that it has to be in partnership and in consultation with those who are being led. Hey, this is a great engagement on how organizational culture really needs all of the strategy, but then needs the culture that supports it. And I think it's been a great way to just take all that we've heard from Dean and then to say, okay, how do we take that and make it work within our organization? Each episode of the Tomorrow Today podcast, we like to recommend a resource that you should check out. So this week, we would like you to check out my friend David Livermore's book, Driven by Difference. David Livermore is a founding member of the Cultural Intelligence Center, and it really helps organizations and leaders to catalyze innovation and growth by developing strategy for culturally intelligent innovations. So in this book, it really looks at quite a few things that organizations can do to create the right environment or the right structure for innovation and leveraging on their diverse talent and their diverse teams. And so some of the things that are covered in the book is looking at like how do we create physical environments that are focused, where focused thinking is fostered among diverse teams, and even the whole aspect of perspective taking, learning to see things as others do, including customers from variety of backgrounds and so on. And also, it does look at things like redesigning the physical spaces that can help to serve as idea incubators and so on. But I think the biggest thing about this book is that it leans on this concept of cultural intelligence and culture in helping us to think about how we can think differently about organizations going forward. Great resource. Take a look at it and see if you can pick up some great insights that will help you in the organizational design for the future.
So we hope that you found this overview of the 3D strategy approach by Dean and our consulting team useful. If you'd like more resources on this or on organizational culture, please just ask us. That's what we're here for. It's what we do, and it's what we love, helping people like you to do better as well. Well, Buhle, I think we did it. That's our second full episode done. I think there's a lot in there. I hope people are still with us, but I think it's a goodie, and I'm sure that they are. What was your biggest takeaway, Buhle, especially from your chat with Dean?
Yeah, I think when it comes to designing the organization of the future, as a leader, don't just adapt to the change, create it. Be an active master architect of shaping how your organization is going to do things differently in a changing world.
That master architect thing, I like that as well. I think for me, it was a reminder of just how important the role of the leader is in shaping culture. I think too many leaders just let culture emerge around them. So they come up with the vision, mission, values, and so on, but don't necessarily work as hard as they could do, or they don't make it a part of their strategy to make organizational culture that actually can deliver on those visions. So for me, I think the 3D model that Dean shared, where the third aspect is about differentiating yourself and then you added that extra element of culture to it, for me, that's a great takeaway. And those who are listening as leaders, we hope we've inspired you to think a little bit more intentionally about your organizational design and your organization's culture.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Make sure that you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to get future episodes of the Tomorrow Today podcast. So please check out the show notes and follow us on social media because we'd really love to connect with you. Well, we'll see you all in the next episode where we will continue looking at this theme of organizational design for the future. Tomorrow Today Podcast, Mapping the Future of Business.